HOA President Jordan Keller thought he could discipline me by cutting my power during the worst heat wave of the summer. Dressed in sharp suits and armed with petty fines, he pushed his authority further than anyone thought possible. But I had one move he didn't see coming, a plan that turned his own actions into the reason for his downfall. And just wait until you hear the twist that made justice hit harder than he ever imagined. You know that feeling when you pull into your driveway after a long day, already planning how you're going to crank up the AC, kick off your shoes, and just exist for the rest of the evening. That was me. It had been one of those brutal July days, the kind where the heat wraps around you like a wet blanket, and every step feels like you're walking through an oven. The thermometer in my car had been laughing at me all afternoon, flashing triple digits like it was proud of itself. So I parked, grabbed my bag, and headed inside, already picturing the cold blast from my air conditioner. Except there was no cold blast. There was no anything. The moment I opened the door, I was met with silence. Not the peaceful, relaxing kind of silence. The kind that makes you stop in your tracks because something's wrong. I flicked the light switch. Nothing. Pressed the power button on the fan. Dead. The little hum from the fridge. Gone. My kitchen felt warmer than outside, which was saying something. I pulled open the fridge and saw my ice cubes halfway melted into sad little puddles, milk already starting to sweat in its carton. At first, I thought maybe the power company was having an outage. It happens sometimes in the summer when everyone's blasting their AC at the same time. But then I noticed something odd. The houses across the street, their lights were on. The guy next door was watching TV. I could see the flicker from his living room. That's when my stomach sank. This wasn't a neighborhood outage. This was just me. I stepped outside looking around, trying to figure out if maybe I'd missed a notice or if there was some kind of repair going on. That's when my neighbor, Linda, poked her head out from behind her front door. She had that expression, you know. The one that says, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but you deserve to know. She glanced around like she was checking to make sure no one was listening, and then said, Michael, I heard Jordan talking at the clubhouse this afternoon. He told someone he cut your power. I must have looked like I didn't hear her right, because she added quickly, he said it was because you didn't pay that new special fee for the clubhouse renovations. You know, the one none of us even wanted. And just like that, everything clicked into place. Jordan Keller, our HOA president, the man who treated the neighborhood like his personal kingdom. He'd been pushing this special assessment for months. Thousands of dollars per homeowner to redo the clubhouse, install new furniture, repaint the walls. The works. I'd voted against it. Why? Because I never use the clubhouse. I don't host events there. I don't go to their wine tastings. And I sure don't need to fund his pet project. Apparently, that was enough to put me on his bad list. And now, here I was standing in my own sweltering kitchen, watching my food slowly spoil, because Jordan decided to teach me a lesson. I just stood there for a moment taking it all in, the heat pressing against me from every direction, the hum of air conditioners in every other house on the block. The absurdity of the fact that a grown man in a position of community responsibility had decided the best use of his authority was to flip the switch on my power. And the worst part, at that exact moment, I didn't even know how I was going to respond. All I knew was that the shock was already giving way to something else, something sharper, If there's one thing I've learned about homeowners associations, it's that the president sets the tone. And with Jordan Keller at the helm, our HOA's tone could be summed up in 3 words: condescending, rigid, and exhausting. Jordan was the kind of man who dressed like he was heading to a corporate board meeting. To check the mail, tailored suits, shiny shoes you could see your reflection in, a wristwatch that probably cost more than my car. He was always perfectly groomed, not a hair out of place, not a wrinkle in sight. Like he'd stepped out of one of those real estate magazines where everyone's smiling, but you know they'd report you for having the wrong shade of mulch. And then there was the smile. Oh, Jordan's smile could win awards if they gave trophies for hiding insults behind your teeth. It was the kind of smile that looked friendly until you realized it was his way of saying, "I'm about to ruin your day, and I'll enjoy every second of it." I'd seen that smile plenty of times before, usually right before getting one of his courtesy notices. And by courtesy, I mean a printed list of everything he'd decided was wrong with your property that week. Lawn not mowed by exactly 6 o'clock p.m. On Friday? Fine. A flower pot that didn't match the approved color palette? Fine. A single leaf on your driveway during fall? Believe it or not, fine. Jordan was relentless. But cutting off someone's electricity during the hottest week of the summer, that was a whole new level. That wasn't just nitpicking. That was a calculated move. I tried to call him first. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I texted. Nothing. It was as if my number had been erased from his world. So, still sweating in my powerless house, I decided to go to the HOA office in person. Maybe face to face, he'd at least have the decency to explain himself. When I walked in, the air conditioning in that office hit me like a wall. It was crisp, cool, almost mocking after the oven I'd just walked through. The receptionist, a woman I'd seen plenty of times at community meetings, barely glanced up from her computer. "I need to speak to Jordan," I said, keeping my voice even. She looked at me like I'd just asked to see a mythical creature. "He's not available." "Then when will he be available?" She tapped something on her keyboard, completely unhurried, and said, "Mr. Keller won't be taking your calls or meetings at this time." It took me a second to process that. "Excuse me?" My power was cut off. "I need to know when it's going to be restored." That's when she gave me a perfectly rehearsed line, the kind that sounded like it had been approved by a lawyer and practiced in a mirror. "This is an internal decision and is not up for discussion." She went back to typing. Conversation over. I stood there, feeling the cold air swirl around me, thinking about how easy it would be for Jordan to just walk into that office, flip a switch, and have all the power, literally and figuratively. And in that moment, the last bits of benefit of the doubt I'd been clinging to dissolved. Jordan wasn't just enforcing rules. He was enjoying this. He wanted to remind me, and maybe the whole neighborhood, that he was the one holding the controls. And as much as I hated to admit it, his message landed loud and clear. But so did another thought, one that would eventually become the seed for a plan he'd never see coming. I'd like to say I cooled down after leaving the HOA office, but that would be a lie. I was boiling, inside and out. The heat in my powerless house was unbearable, but the heat in my head was worse. I kept pacing, running through the same loop of thoughts over and over. How Jordan had ignored me, how the secretary had dismissed me, and how my food was probably spoiling by the minute. Every time I replayed it, my frustration climbed another step up the ladder, and then my eyes drifted toward the corner of my garage. There it was, sitting quietly, covered in a light layer of dust. My gas generator. I'd bought it last year after a brutal winter storm left us without power for 3 days. Back then, it was a lifeline, and now, staring at it, I realized it could be the key to making a point Jordan wouldn't forget. The thought hit me like a cool breeze. If Jordan enjoyed pulling the plug on other people's lives, maybe it was time he learned what it felt like to have the tables turned, to be the one depending on someone else. The more I thought about it, the clearer the plan became. It wasn't going to be loud. It wasn't going to be dramatic. It was going to be subtle, the kind of move where he wouldn't even realize what had happened until he was deep into it. That night, when the HOA office was dark and quiet, I rolled the generator out from the garage. The metal handle was warm from the day's heat, and the wheels squeaked faintly as I guided it down the driveway. Every sound felt louder than it should have. The click of the fuel cap, the pull of the starter cord, but the neighborhood was asleep, and no one noticed. The office's electric meter sat on the side of the building, tucked away, but not locked. I'd passed it 100 times without giving it a thought. Now it felt like the target in a game I'd just decided I was playing. I ran a heavy-duty cable from the generator straight into their meter, making sure every connection was snug. Then I started it up. The engine gave that steady, comforting hum, and I could almost picture the invisible stream of power flowing into the building. And here's the beautiful part. By morning, the HOA office was alive. The air conditioning, running cold. The computers, on and ready. The coffee machine, brewing away. From the outside, it looked like nothing unusual, but every single watt coursing through that building was coming from me, my fuel, my machine. I pictured Jordan strolling into the office that morning, completely unaware that his perfect little kingdom was running on the very neighbor he'd tried to punish. And the more I imagined it, the more a slow, satisfied smile spread across my face. This wasn't revenge, not yet. This was leverage, a small taste of what it felt like to hold the controls, and I had no intention of letting him realize it too quickly. 3 days later, I walked into the HOA office like I had all the time in the world. The same receptionist was there, typing away, barely looking up when I approached the desk. I set down an envelope and slid it toward her. Inside was a neatly printed invoice. Emergency power supply rental, 72 hours. Full market rate. Every gallon of fuel, every hour of runtime, every bit of wear and tear on my generator. Calculated and itemized. At the bottom, in bold, was the total. She blinked at the number, glanced at me, then back at the paper. "What is this?" she asked. "My bill," I said simply, "for keeping your office running during your disciplinary action." It must have taken all of 15 minutes before my phone rang. The caller ID read Jordan Keller. By the time he stormed into my place, his face was already flushed. Whether from the heat or from pure fury, I couldn't tell. He didn't bother with small talk. "You think this is funny?" he snapped, waving the invoice in the air like it was a personal insult. I stayed seated, calm as ever. "I think it's business," I said. He started, but I held up a finger, cutting him off. "Before you say anything else," I said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table toward him, "you might want to take a look at this." It was a copy of his own letter, the one he'd sent to notify me that my power cutoff had been an intentional disciplinary decision. His exact words in black and white. That, I said evenly, is a written admission. You intentionally disrupted essential utilities in the middle of a heat wave, and now I have a clear record showing your office relied on my generator during that time. His eyes flicked between the paper and me. The color started to drain from his face. You wouldn't, he began, but stopped short. The confidence in his voice wavered. He knew exactly what this meant. If this ever made it past the neighborhood, his pristine image would take a hit, not to mention what it might mean legally. I didn't press the point. I didn't need to. The silence between us did all the work. By the end of the week, my power was back on. The so-called special fee for clubhouse renovations canceled. I didn't get a thank you, but I didn't need one. The real moment of satisfaction came at the next homeowners meeting. The votes were quick, almost clinical, and when the count was done, Jordan Keller was no longer HOA president. I lingered after the meeting, just long enough to see him in his office one last time, quietly packing his things into a cardboard box. No speeches, no farewells, just the sound of drawers closing and tape tearing. As I walked out, I thought about the gallons of fuel I'd burned for those 3 days. Every single one had been worth it. Not for the money, not even for the restored power, but for the sight of a man who had built his little empire on control, finally having to carry it out the door. And that, I decided, was the best return on investment I'd ever made.